there! Welcome to my brand new channel. My name's Ashley and today I'm going to show you guys how I tiled my kitchen backsplash for the very first time using glass tile. Now this is a two-part series, so today I'm technically in this video not showing you guys how I tile, but how I prepped the surface and the big problems that we ran into. And I'm going to show you basically everything that you don't want to do because we made a lot of mistakes as, like I said, we're not professionals. This was our first time and we had a lot of bumps along the way. And if you want to watch part 2, I'll link that in the description below, and that is where I actually tile the kitchen backsplash. I'll also link all of the products below for your convenience. Now without further ado, let's go ahead and get to the video.
So as you can see here, our kitchen is very dated. And if it were up to me and I had the funds, I would just gut the whole thing and start over. But I'm not going to spend that much money since we're trying to move in a couple of years. Now in this picture you can see we have this really boring laminate backsplash in countertops. And I thought it would be a great idea to learn how to tile by doing a kitchen backsplash. I thought it was going to be really easy. I was actually very wrong about that. But we'll get into that in a minute. So when I was deciding what kind of tile to pick out, I went to Pinterest for inspiration. And I wanted to do something that was similar to this look. So my husband and I ended up going to Lowe's and buying a whole bunch of this glass subway tile. Now at the time, I had no idea that glass tile was a lot harder to work with than regular ceramic or porcelain tile. Now I've watched every tiling tutorial video on YouTube that you can imagine. I'm basically YouTube certified. Now let me tell you, glass tile is a completely different type of beast. And because of that, I did have some trouble, so I went to the great interwebs for help and I joined some tiling Facebook groups. Now some of them were okay, but some of the guys in some of these groups were just like, oh, you're working with glass, you need to hire a professional. You need to stop what you're doing right now. And I almost gave up. I almost was going to take all the glass back and try to go for something easier. But I joined this one group called Tile Chicks. And let me tell you, those women were super encouraging and helpful. And they're the ones that convinced me that I could do it. They're like, yeah, it's going to be a little hard, but you can do it. And I had a couple of women even call me and like really give me some words of encouragement. I had one woman who actually stepped me through. Tracy, I'm talking about you. She stepped me through a whole bunch of stuff. So overall, anytime I wanted to ask a question, no matter how dumb it was, no one ever made me feel stupid in that group. I highly recommend this group if you're wanting to get into the tiling industry and really get into tile. These women are going to help you out. Now I later learned that Floor & Decor had much better options as far as tile, and they had really good prices. So definitely check out Floor & Decor if you have one in your area. So after we ordered tons of supplies off of Amazon and picked up our tile, we began ripping off this laminate. Now I didn't learn until after that we could have actually tiled over this laminate. Someone from Tile Chicks informed me of that, but it was already too late at that point. But it ended up working out that we actually ripped it off on this wall, because if we wouldn't have ripped it off, it would have made the wall uneven and stick out at the bottom, because we were going to tile past the laminate section on this wall. Now one of the things we were actually excited about was getting rid of this phone jack and covering it up. Because let's be real, who uses landlines in 2020? Besides my mom. Now once we got rid of the phone jack box, we put a 2x4 in the back of it to offer support when we made our sheetrock patch. We also took out the outlets that we didn't need and turned off the electric for those parts. But for the outlets that we were using, I just put some painter's tape around it, and I tried to avoid that area as much as I could. Now one of the things that I found online that would be useful for removing laminate was buying a heat gun to kind of warm up the glue. You just have to be really careful with it. And also this little tool that I use for literally everything. I'll link the products in the description below if you want to check them out. But by far the hardest part to remove was that part that meets the cabinet counter. That was always like such a pain to remove. And finally, after slaving away for quite some time, we got the whole left side of the laminate off. Now since I learned that I can actually tile over laminate, we decided not to tear down the right side because the laminate went all the way up to where we were going to tile anyway, so we were just going to cover that. So in order to prepare the left wall for tiling, there was a few steps I had to take. First, I tore off all the loose pieces of paper that I could, and if there were any holes or gouges, I went over that with a little bit of joint compound to smooth it out. Now since the top of the sheetrock was exposed, I went ahead and added a layer of Kills just to add a little protection, so that way when we put the thin set over the walls, the moisture wouldn't seep through the sheetrock. So right as we began picking up speed on this project, we ran into our first really big problem. Right behind the sink, the caulking had worn off and water seeped behind the laminate and warped the MDF wood, causing it to bulge up a little bit. Now originally I didn't want to spend the money on replacing the sink and the faucet, but because we were going to have to rip the sink out to repair this wood, we went ahead and bought a brand new sink and a brand new faucet, one that was taller and really fit the space, and it was on sale. So this wood that had gotten wet was completely destroyed. It was just completely soft, as you can see here. Now luckily we had a scrap piece of wood in the garage that was about the right height, but we needed to cut it to length. So we used some brad nails and some wood glue, and I used my Dremel tool to cut an extra piece of laminate that we tore off from the walls to fit the area, and we clamped it all together and let it dry. Now just when we thought that we were going to be able to put our sink back on, some of the glue had seeped out during the drying process and got on the clamps, and so when we tried to take the clamps off, it tore the laminate off with it. So I had to re-glue the laminate back on, and my father-in-law suggested we put a nice board on top to keep everything straight, and then we re-clamped it. And this time we removed it a little bit earlier and let it dry overnight, and then we were able to put the sink back on the next day. So one of the other things we were dealing with was deciding if we should remove the shelf or not. Now I wanted to get rid of it because I felt like it dated the space. It wasn't attractive, it was splitting on one end, and I really wanted to bring the tile all the way to the top and give it a more modern, open look. The only problem was that if we removed the shelf, I was afraid I wasn't going to be able to match the stain on both sides of the cabinets. But my sister-in-law suggested that we just paint it white on each side. Now I don't plan on painting the cabinets white, so it wasn't a perfect solution, but in the end it still turned out looking really nice. So as we were waiting for the glue to dry from the countertops, my husband began removing the shelf. Now once he removed it, it put a lot of holes in the sheetrock, so we had to repair that as well. So I measured it, and I basically calculated 1.5 inches longer and 1.5 inches wider than the damage actually was. And then I just moved those measurements onto a piece of sheetrock, squared it up, then I cut it out with my razor. Then I put my sheetrock patch on the wall over the damaged area and traced around it, so that way my husband would know exactly what he needed to cut out. Now for added support, we put a few 2x4s behind the wall and screwed them in, and then we placed our patches into the hole and screwed them into the 2x4s. After that, I used some drywall mesh tape and I taped over the joints and over the screw heads, and then we used some joint compound and smoothed everything over. I believe I put about 2 or 3 layers of joint compound on the patches, and then once the last layer dried, I sanded it a little bit more flush with the wall. Now I believe it was after this exact step when we applied the keels to the wall to provide a little bit of a waterproofing barrier and to seal in the sheetrock. Now because my wall was a little bit uneven in different areas, we decided to put a thin layer of thinset on the wall and smooth it out as best as we could. Now we purchased our first mixer on Amazon, but it was pretty cheap, and when I got it, the quality just wasn't there. So I decided to go ahead and return it, and we went back to Lowe's and got a DeWalt mixer, which we're very happy with. The quality is a lot better. Yeah, it costs a little bit more, but I told my husband, I said, if this works out, we're going to be doing a lot more projects and it'll be worth the investment. The only regret I have is I wish we would have bought the larger or the longer mixing blade. That way my husband didn't have to crouch over so far every time he needed to mix something up. Another thing that took us a while to get started was the Lowe's guy directed us to get the wrong supplies. So originally we got this pre-mixed mastic, which I learned was not good for glass tiles because glass tile is not porous, and so it never really dries or creates a great bond for your tile. So you need to get a thin set that is specific to glass tile. Thankfully I learned this in the Tile Chicks group before I even started my project, so I was able to take it back and get the correct thin set for the job. Now in order to tile the remaining laminate wall and even the painted portion of the wall on the left side, we needed to prepare the surface so that the tile would have a good bond. So it was suggested to me to pick up this hardcore primer called Eco Prime Grip from Magpie. This primer does have a little bit of a smell, so I recommend wearing a mask while using it because it did give me a slight headache. I also recommend setting aside a roller specific for this primer because it actually has sand granules inside of the primer, and you're never going to get that out of the roller. And what the sand does is it grips onto the wall and also grips onto your thin set and gives a great bond. Now before we even rolled on the primer, we did take a box cutter and make slices across the laminate wall and across the painted parts, and this just helped our primer adhere to the flat walls a little bit better. And after about 99 years of endless prep work, we were finally ready to tile our first kitchen backsplash. Now I'm going to go ahead and end it here, but I hope to catch you guys in part 2 where I actually get to do the fun part and tile my kitchen backsplash. Thanks for watching, have a great day.